Hello and welcome to Cargo Masterminds presented by cargo.one. My name is Reggie John and you are watching Cargo Masterminds presented by cargo.one. Intradco Global was established in the United Kingdom in 1987 as Intradco Cargo Services by Eddie McMullen and his business partner Sam Harris. Back then, it handled all types of cargo before specializing in animal transportation. Its first animal shipment was in 1989, and it was a modest consignment of just 6 horses from London to Accra in Ghana, mixed with other general cargo. 32 years later, Intradco Global, a Chapman Freeborn company, is globally recognized as the world's leading equine, livestock, and exotic transportation air charter specialist. Today, Intradco's high-profile cargo charters include flights for the world-famous Class 1 thoroughbreds, show-jumping showcases around the world, best livestock transport, and the movement of exotic animals for the zoos and conservation programs. Today, the Intradco Global team is led by its director, Charlie McMullen. Charlie, who started with Intradco as a stallman, flying groom, and flight project manager, became the director of Intradco Global in 2015, a year after Chapman Freeborn, now an Avia Solutions Group company, completed the acquisition of Intradco Global. Charlie McMullen, director of Intradco Global, joins me in this edition of Cargo Masterminds to tell many fascinating stories behind the business of animal transport by air. Charlie, welcome to Cargo Masterminds and great to have you.
Morning, Reggie. Always a pleasure. How are you doing?
Good. Charlie, let us start with how you got yourself into Intradco Global, a company that started by your father. Tell us how you got into this at a very young age. You started as a stallman, then a flying groom and a flight project manager, and now you are the director of the company.
Yeah, well, as you pointed out, it was my dad founded the company alongside Sam. So I was roped into the business at a young age. Good memories of being at airports as a kid. But the first one I remember, we were in Shannon Airport in Ireland, and it was during the boom of ostrich meat being a fashionable meat, low fat alternative for red meat. And we were bringing in, from memory, I think it was about 200 or 300 ostriches into Ireland that day. And I helped offload it, which was a good experience. And it was extremely memorable, not only because it was my first time at the airport, but Manchester United also won the Champions League that night against Bayern Munich. So doubly good news.
I'm just curious to know from you, what was your age then?
My age, I would have been around 11 or 12 years old. I'd need to check exactly.
Did you miss your favorite club's match on that day, or did you catch up on part of it?
I think by the time we got back to the airport hotel, I might have caught the second half, which is when all the action happened. So that was fine.
Charlie, in 2015, you became the director of Intradco Global a year after the company was acquired by Chapman Freeborn. Tell us about the team that you handle now across different parts of the world. There's been a lot of business development that happened with Intradco Global over the last few years.
Correct. Yeah. When we joined the Chapman Group, we were a very small team that moved across. And the whole idea of joining Chapman Freeborn was that so we could spread our expertise across the different geographical offices that Chapman Freeborn have. It's worked to an extent, but it's also highlighted that the requirement for technical knowledge is so important for our product. And trying to spread that knowledge across the different offices has been a slower progression than we anticipated. So what we have done is tended to create a knowledge hub within our Gatwick office, which is the UK office, where a lot of the trainees are coming in and learning the ropes. And at a point when we feel they have enough technical knowledge, then they become salespeople and can progress onto other offices. So at the moment, the big hub is still UK. We have progressed into North America, where the Toronto office is the kind of HQ for the Americas now. And we have a small team out there, which is doing a lot of really good equine and livestock business. And then more recently, Dubai, where we now have a full-time placement, focusing again mainly on primarily the livestock and equine business. Next, I would hope we're going to have a team somewhere Australasia, Far East, which we're working on at the moment. But we don't have a final plan on that, but I would hope in 2022 that should come into force.
Charlie, what would be the total number of people in your team right now in the Intradco Global?
So not including back office, because Chapman Freeborn manage a majority of that. If we purely look to operational and commercial teams, we're now at 19, which when we came across, we were at 3. So fairly steep learning curve and trying to pull extra resource and make sure all of that team are going in the same direction. But I would think fairly quick growth will happen from that now, where I'd see the size of North America and Dubai kind of tripling over the next 2 years.
That really surprises me. 19 people behind so much of animal transport that is happening. That's phenomenal. Of course, you have the back-end support from the Chapman team. Charlie, on to your 3 types of business vertical in the animal transport that Intradco is involved in. You have the equine or horse transportation, which seems to be the biggest portion of your business. So is in terms of volume and value, is that the biggest portion of your 3 verticals?
It historically has always been, and it currently is now, but it has been losing ground. Typically, if we were to look over the last 10 years, horses was about 80% of the business. If we now look across 2020 and 2021, that's actually reduced to about 60%. That's a combination. We have been slightly slower in the horse market ourselves. There's been some strong competitors, but then there's also a big growth in our livestock movements, which is both genetic, commercial, and some of the poultry business, which has been growing very quickly over the last 2 years. But that would also follow an industry trend as well, which we'll probably go on to some numbers in a bit about how the industry looks across the whole air freight market for live animal and what the trends are between equine, poultry, and livestock movements.
But is that, do you intend to regain your market position on the horses, or will that be dictated by your volume of business being generated from the other 2 sectors, or at least from the livestock sector?
Yeah, that's certainly the plan. I'm hoping we'll get it back, and I'm sure we will. A key issue that we've actually had, we underinvested in horse equipment, which we knew we did, but we didn't have a product we were especially happy with. We've had many prototypes over the last 4 to 5 years that we thought would go into development, but for various reasons, we just haven't committed to actually investing that spend. I'm glad to say, as of about 3 months ago, actually, we now have a final prototype we are happy with. So over 2022, that is when we'll have an additional 30 initial pre-prototypes that are going to come on into the market, and then that will be about 120 extra stalls by the end of 2022. Now, if that happens, I'm sure equine will see a resurgence again.
Okay, you mentioned about 2020 and the first half of 2021 has not been really good in terms of your horse transportation. But on an average, how many horses do you fly around the world in a year?
It does vary, but if we were to look over the last few years, 3,000 is the top range, and then 2,000 is the lower range. And we're at the 2,000 at the moment as an average of the last 2 years. If you looked at the market as a total, from what we usually see is about 15 to 18,000 horses moving a year. And that's across the whole market, split between quite a lot of fragmented agents who are managing those different lanes, whether it's the Americas lanes, whether it's South America, UAE, or Middle East. And that has been quite strong actually over the last 2 years. We thought that COVID would have reduced that number a lot, but during 2020, it was towards the higher range. It was still around 18,000 horses, which I guess for any airlines viewing this, it's quite an interesting metric to look at 18,000 horses. As an average, we would say that's probably about 8,000 PMCs in total, main deck PMCs. So if you were looking to put that into charter perspective, it's around 350 777 or 74 charters, but that doesn't happen like that. It's split between a majority of it is scheduled business, and then what we would estimate is around 15% is charter business.
As you prepare to get your market, regain your market position, and you prepare yourself in terms of your equipment for horse transportation by 2022, what is the kind of numbers that you're looking at? What would be your capabilities by 2022?
In relation to the equipment, we currently have quite an aged fleet of stalls, which on a usable basis, it's not going to be north of around 60 stalls at the moment, which is quite a low amount. By the end of 2022, I would hope to have about 120 stalls, which will be in usable, brand new condition. And I would hope market leading stalls in terms of the design we've done. The focus, I think, will actually be not only on the charters, which we're still extremely strong in, but the schedule side of the business as well, where there's a very strong lane between Europe and America. You've usually got around 8,000 horses moving on that route per year. And I think that's where we'll be targeting first. And let's hope we can pick up another 1,000 horses on that route.
I also want to get back to you on something you mentioned about the fragmented industry that is in the horse transport. Do you expect to see any kind of consolidation in that market space?
It's a good question. We've looked at how the market could play out, and I think the reason it's remained fragmented is the need for local knowledge. It's such a technical product that every geography has its own nuances, and there's not many global players, which is where we are aiming to get to over the next 5 to 10 years. I can't see a quick change, if I'm honest. I think there's some very strong localized agents that control certain lanes, and they do a very good job. It will be interesting to see what happens with airlines and other freight forwarders maybe adopting their own live animal divisions, which we've seen happen in quite a few airlines already. And if the supply chain really does shorten, I don't think it will be a short-term trend. I think it may be 10 to 20 years as opposed to the next 1 to 5. But yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on that for sure.
Okay, coming to your next important vertical, which is the livestock. How significant is the livestock? And you did mention that that's a business that is really growing significantly over the last few years.
It has been, yeah. There's been some fairly large trends that has driven genetic livestock transportation, especially by air. The biggest would have to be actually the swine movements or pig movements that are moving into the Far East. African swine flu decimated a lot of the Chinese stocks. So in order to rebuild their pork supply in the Far East, they've been importing from a variety of different areas, whether it's Europe, which is mainly focused around France, Denmark, and UK, or North America being Canada and US. And as a total, I mean, we would estimate around 150 charters will be moving across this year in 2021 at the higher end. Hopefully we will see a lot of that business, which we're extremely busy with at the moment. And it is the first time actually, I think in the last 2 years where our top clients have not been equine. They've been focused on the genetic livestock business. And
you said 250 charters. That includes only the swine transport, or also all the combined livestock transport?
No, around 150 just for genetic. I think that would be for the swine charters moving across. For other genetic, you have dairy cattle. A lot of the poultry charters has been very busy as well. And I think the reason there's been an increase in poultry is actually due to the capacity constraints caused by COVID. The amount of scheduled business that they either got squeezed out of due to price, or they just could not find the space, or the schedule lane they were operating on just completely ceased to exist. It's created a big upturn in smaller charters that we've been operating. Europe, North Africa, even America across into North Africa, Europe into Middle East. They've all been busy routes for the poultry, which is still classified within genetic.
I'm sure that you are referring to the day-old chicks transported in the bellies of the passenger planes. I have seen myself in Doha and the other places. I don't know, has that market completely wiped out because of the COVID, or you still have a significant portion of that day-old chicks genetic variety coming into freighter operations, scheduled cargo operations, or cargo charters?
It's still operating. I mean, the market's so big that it wouldn't be slowed down. It's a very valuable market. And all that's changed really is the method of transport, as opposed to a majority. I don't have the exact figures, but I would throw it out there that about 80% must be moving on schedule, maybe closer towards 90. From what we've seen from the shippers is they now need services which include a charter option, or maybe a part charter option into a hub where they can then actually access a different schedule mark. So it's still flying. The tonnages haven't decreased. There's still around 30 million tons per year moved of poultry, which is split between day-old chicks and hatching eggs.
Did you have a charter full of day-old chicks moving? Have you done that?
Oh, many. We've got one. In fact, we've got 2 flights booked next week to West Africa. That will be carrying around 1,200 boxes. So fairly small charters, kind of 737 size. But yeah, they're increasing in frequency at the moment. And I think it will happen up until scheduled capacity comes back into the market on the PAX aircraft.
Okay, I'm also a bit curious. Do you deploy like a 747, 777 for this kind of movement, poultry movement?
Very rarely. We did an Airbus about 3 weeks ago, but that was for hatching eggs. It was around 30 tons, so it's very, very dense cargo hatching eggs. I would need to check with the poultry team what the largest they've done, but 777's a bit too much. A330s are regularly flying, or not regularly, let's say one or two every quarter. But traditionally, smaller aircraft is better suited.
For the breeding purposes that you move the cargo around, I believe these are quite regular and scheduled, or is that still being ad hoc basis?
It's still ad hoc. I mean, remembering that we are still a charter-focused company, where we do a lot of schedule business, but the forwarder business tends to not come to us. They would come to us when they need part charters or charter solutions. The genetic livestock, there is still a huge amount which is charter focused, particularly when you're looking at cattle, swine, and goat and sheep movements, because of the size of these trades. Usually, they usually need the scale of a 777 or a 74 or an Airbus. I guess the big difference really has again, going back to the swine movements, is that not too much on the trade deals, particularly to China, have been small enough that they need schedule capacity. But we do still focus on it, particularly on the poultry side and hatching eggs. But that's more a forwarder related business than what we do.
Charlie, can you think of a project or a shipment that you have a record of executing it in the shortest period of time? That's what cargo charter brokers are actually meant for. From the time you get a call for a charter and then delivery to the destination.
It's fairly rare that we need to do urgent charters because of the time lag, the lag time that you get in between a request for health certification, quarantining, ground transportation even is fairly complex in the supply chain. Usually we have weeks to plan for charters, if not longer. But we did receive, there was a request last year that we flew, which was just 4 horses that were in one of the smaller Greek islands. And they were undergoing a massive heat wave. I think they were approaching nearly 50 degrees in Greece at the time. And we had a call to urgently fly these horses out. So we managed to find I believe it was a 737 that could operate quickly. We had the permits rushed through, and stalls, actually, we had an express truck meet the aircraft that was I think it was in Northern Europe, in Germany at the time, from our yard in Belgium. And the grooms boarded the flight down to the Greek island. I can't actually remember which one it was, but it was a fairly small airport. And loaded or built the stalls. That was only about a 2-hour process. Loaded the horses and came back. So from point of receiving request to actually horses arriving back into the Netherlands, it must have been less than 48 hours.
Charlie, also I want to get you to talk about the exotic part of the business. That's what a lot of eyeballs actually comes in, because the moment you put out a news saying that you're moving like 8 or 9 rhinos from one part of the world to the other. Tell us about how significant is that part of your business, and give us a sense of some of the most important exotic animals that have been like moved around in the last 6 months.
Yeah, exotic, it's always a headline catcher. When you say you're moving 66 giraffes in one flight, or actually 76 now, it's possible on the Dash 8. But it is actually a fairly small part of the market. If you look at the tonnages, there's less than 1 million tons being moved, sorry, 1 million kilos being moved per year. And the focus that we tend to receive is, again, for the part charter movements, whether it's zoo to zoos movements, which is usually where zoos have a requirement to change the species, so interbreeding doesn't happen. So we're involved in a lot of that. And then you also have just direct trade, which is between, whether there's American zoos or zoos in the Far East, and between Europe and Africa. But a big movement has actually now, which is really positive, has been in conservation, where there is zoos are realizing that animals like this should not be kept in confinement or in certain conditions in certain countries, and are being moved back into Africa. And we've seen a lot of good, really, really heartwarming charters that we've done, which have come from, I guess one of them was Johannesburg to Rwanda, which Rwanda has an extremely good track record for anti-poaching. So they moved 19 black rhino from Johannesburg into Rwanda, which luckily we saw, from the whole length of the supply chain. I was on the flight as well, but our team was in the Boma, which is the quarantine in South Africa, the whole way through on the ground transport. We traveled on both of the flights between Johannesburg and Kigali, and then the trucks into Agakira National Park, which was an amazing experience to see. That even when we arrived into into Agakira Park, all of the school children that were close to the park had lined the streets. They were all singing to welcome the rhinos in, which was quite emotional.
What typically goes into a project of, I'm just giving an example of a 747-8 cargo charter, if it's carrying about 85 to 90 horses. Tell us briefly what the complex process involved as soon as you get a request that comes in, how you decide an aircraft and what actually goes behind.
Yeah, it's very dependent on the customer, because the customer will have a different level of experience in what they want to manage themselves internally. And what we need to assist them with. But if you were looking at the full range of services, so let's say 80 horses moving from US to Europe, there will be a quarantine process where the horses will be segregated from other horse populations. And at that point, health testing schedules come into play. So all of the blood tests will be taken. Vets will give an approval that they satisfy the health conditions of the importing country. And once that is approved, which health certification is usually finalized or endorsed about 24 hours or 48 hours before the flight. We often don't get involved, but we can loop in agents in particular geographies that can perform that service. Our responsibility usually comes in from an airport to airport perspective, plus the ULB management. So we would organize the correct plane, the right price, hopefully, and obviously at the right time. Then all of our stalls would be positioned to a particular airport, along with our grooms and ground team. So that would happen traditionally a few days before. And then we would have a few days to build the stalls, which could be, let's say, a fleet of 30 stalls, usually arriving in collapsed form. They would build them, prepare the loading ramps, brief the airport in how the process is going to go. And then in usual times, we would travel with the horses on the freighter and then perform exactly the reverse on the other end, where the majority of the time the horses will again go into quarantine in the import country. But it does vary. It varies massively between countries as well.
If I were to ask you to pick up from your own experience, the most complex and the most challenging cargo transport in the animal shipment, what would be that? And do you get a chance to now accompany some of this shipment? Because you've been very much a part of these in your younger age.
It's happening less and less, Reggie. I'd have to admit, I'm behind a computer screen far more than I'm used to. But I guess that's just the way the business is demanding it now. But I still get out quite a lot. We particularly for key accounts, new airports. We have a really testing flight actually going into Chelyabinsk Airport tomorrow, which is a full charter of pigs. They're not familiar with handling that type of cargo, but we had to do it due to the quarantine place of the farm. That is traditionally a movement that I would always go to ensure that the ground teams are doing what's required. But due to COVID, Russia is on the red list at the moment. So it's not easy to actually have the experts where you need them at the right time. But sorry, did you ask which movements I am now making it to?
No, I asked what would be if you were to pick the most complex and the challenging, not really the most satisfying, because I'm in terms, I just want to understand what is the complexity or the most complex operation that you were part of.
Even though it may not be the most interesting answer, horses is still the most complex. Lots of other animals are usually packaged in a way where you don't want to interfere with them too much during flight. For instance, an elephant is usually, besides the vets being extremely important, so the dosage of tranquilizer that's needed during flight, which is usually kind of a U-bend drug. So the highest sedation levels is during flight to keep them relaxed. Horses are rarely drugged and need minute-to-minute attention. You cannot just lock a horse away and then look on the other side. That's where the skill of the grooms during the loading process, during the flight and the offloading is essential. And you never quite know what you will get with horses either. They've all got their own personality. Some are lovely, some are horrible, and you need to be able to manage each horse individually.
Charlie, when was the last time that you accompanied one of these charters?
Oh, that was only about 3 weeks ago, actually. So not too far away, but it was a small movement. It was only about 15 horses at the time, but on a 737 charter. But I'm hoping post-COVID, we should be traveling a lot more. We'll see how things pan out.
And that was from where? What was the origin and the destination?
That was Stansted to Dubai, so quite a local one. I didn't have to travel too far for that.
Charlie, I also want to understand all the other livestock and exotic animals. If they are packed and they're well packaged and they put into the aeroplane, they would probably will travel to the destination. But when it comes to horses, what happens if a horse refuses to get into a stall or get into an airplane? What happens?
Oh, it does happen. It happens quite often, actually. Where some horses are either not used to traveling or are just inherently claustrophobic. So trying to put them into a stall is either unethical or very difficult, which way you look at it. But again, it comes down to the skill of the grooms. I've seen many a horse not want to load, and then the grooms go through their plan of how they want to do it. You've got techniques such as opening the partitions up or opening the stall so it has no partitions, which increases the size within the stall. Walk the horse in, turn it a few times, make it happy within its surroundings. And then, let's say 8 times out of 10, that works. So it's all down to the technique. But we've seen a few difficult loaders over our years. Yeah.
Okay, let me come to your key innovations in designing modern and easy to use equipment that are used for horse transport, livestock, and exotic to ensure that the animals travel under the best of the condition. Tell us about some of the innovation that you're doing. Basically, you're building up your capacity in terms of equipment that eventually would be used, or upgrading your equipment for potential market upswing in 2022 or 2023.
Yeah, so we've already touched on the horse stall development, which is a new fleet designed for 777 and 747s. So what you would call an HML or an HMR stall. There's a bunch of design features which I probably won't go through now because we haven't released them yet, but I'm sure that these will be a market-leading stall once they come to market. And the view is that we'd have around 120 of those by end of 2022. So they will be for our own use, but also for the market as well, in terms of a few airlines that could use these for their own fleet. The next developments, we already have 2 triple deck sheep stalls, or full sets of triple deck sheep stalls, which they are, the market leading stalls. They in terms of the design for animal welfare, but also cost efficiency, which is important within the livestock market. These are full 777 or 74 contour, but can be collapsed down. So a full charter can be collapsed down to only 7 PMCs or 7 lower deck PMCs. So a lot of our trade within the Middle East and now increasingly the amount of Far East, it's a really handy tool to have. There's a few niche developments that we use just for our own charters, which the most recent one has been the pig lift, which had a catchy name. That was designed just to improve the speed of loading and the welfare and improve the welfare of the loading technique for pigs, which it's a completely flat loading process where we actually kind of modified a catering truck, which is traditionally used to bring food for into passenger aircraft, and we kitted it all out so it's now livestock friendly. So it can mean we can use a completely flat platform to load pigs into single, double, or triple deck stalls.
Okay, let's discuss Intradco dynamic. Intradco is already known as animal transport specialist. Now you're raising your bar and you're creating very, very niche products, and those are under Intradco dynamic with a very specific focus on niche cargo transport that requires, extraordinary expertise. Going forward, how critical is this going to be? And 2 things that are part of this is Bantus and live events, which are completely wiped off because of the COVID, but you have chilled meats and life science, which are, again, important business opportunities or verticals that you can really explore those markets. Tell us about the importance of Intradco dynamic, and going forward, how significant this will be in your portfolio of businesses.
Well, I guess it's important to say that animals will still remain the focus. It's not that we're diversifying away completely to a different product, but I was choosing some other verticals that I saw as being kind of symbiotic to what the live animal market is. And that's in two areas. There's how our teams operate and develop their own technical knowledge of a specific product, which means we can give the shippers an excellent service compared to hopefully other players in the market. But then there's also the level of investment or infrastructure that you need to actually fulfill a certain product. So whether that's different type of warehousing or different type of ULDs that are needed, we had a structure that, or a model from the live animal business that we could replicate across into chilled meat, the band tours to an extent as well. But another kind of key point when you look at the charter market, we often have a lot of time in order to quote live animal movements. You know, it can be weeks, it can be months ahead, which the band tours and events market is quite similar. So we can develop these kind of almost like a schedule of ad hoc charters that are moving around. And we do that quite successfully, is piecing together, you know, a band tour sector from A to B, and then a live animal movement from C back towards A.
You said about there are two things, which is the chilled meats as well as the life science. Have you already started moving those things already?
Life sciences is a product that's growing. We've only done a few movements, and we're not, besides kind of sitting on the website at the moment, we're not actively going out and doing BD on that. That will be I think probably around a 2 to 3 year period actually, whilst we develop some infrastructure behind that. Chilled meats has been fairly busy, and that's mainly because of the same customer set that we have from commercial livestock is now looking at cheaper ways to transport their meats or their trade, and that has come in the form of chilled meat. But that came off the back of scheduled services also having capacity issues, where as opposed to moving, let's say, 2 tons per day across a certain period, now 15 to 20 tons across one charter is seen as a better solution.
And what are predominantly those trade lanes that you're moving chilled meats?
Massively focused towards the Middle East, you know, into the Gulf. Not that we are involved in it, but Australia is the largest. There's huge tonnages coming ex-Australia, but there's a growing number of movements coming out of Eastern Europe and also Eastern Africa now, all focused towards the Gulf.
What has been the impact of COVID on your animal transportation business? Did that really significantly affect, or did not make much of a difference to your business volumes?
Yeah, when it happened, I was, you know, petrified. Actually, I was thinking that live animal movements would come to a complete halt. Luckily, that did not happen. You know, the market still kept going. A few areas, you know, particularly in the exotics and some of the commercial livestock, saw a big downwards trend. But horses and genetic livestock really kept growing, actually, which was quite surprising. So we were busier than ever. Over, let's say, the first 2 to 3 months, it did have a real impact whilst the market was figuring out how they were going to manage this, which is when we transitioned actually into PPE flying, as a lot of the market did. So we were still very busy during that period. The key issue, surprisingly, has not actually been the animal movements. You know, the animals have been able to move. They've had the same health certification, haven't really been classified as a risk of being a COVID carrier. The key problem has actually been humans, you know, or our grooms or our stockmen that are meant to be managing movements internationally. So that's been the key hurdle to get around. But the market's figured it out, and we now have a network of people in the right places, so we can still perform those movements.
Charlie, it was such a pleasure talking to you. Really appreciate your time.
Likewise, Reggie. Anytime. Hope again soon.
That was Charlie McMullen, Director of Intradco Global. I hope you enjoyed watching this interview. If you like what we do, please do share this video among your social networks. Also, if you're not a subscriber of our YouTube channel, please do subscribe now and click the bell icon so that you do not miss any of our new videos. Join me next Monday as I bring a new guest for a one-to-one conversation here in Cargo Masterminds, presented by cargo.one. Take care, stay safe. Thank you.